My name is Lilith. Growing up, every story, every moment, and every spotlight in my family revolved around my older sister, Emily. Me? I was just the backdrop, the nerdy girl with messy hair, glasses, and a book always in my hands. You know that feeling? It's like having two pets at home. One is a glamorous Persian cat, always primed and preened, who gets a chorus of oohs and ahs just by jumping on the sofa. The other one, that's me, was probably a plain-looking mutt, quietly gnawing on a bone in the corner. Emily was a natural socialite from a young age. She was beautiful, charming, and looked good in everything she wore. She didn't even have to try to be the center of attention. My parents, they treated her like the family's crown jewel. In elementary school, she acted in a small play because she was cute, and my mom would brag about it to all our relatives for a whole year. She could put together any outfit, and my mom would praise her like she was a fashion magazine editor. And me? I remember once, I won first place in a statewide math Olympiad. I came home so excited, clutching my certificate. My mom just glanced at it and then turned to Emily, saying, "Emily, honey, have you picked out your dress for the dance this weekend? Do you want mommy to help you choose the prettiest one?" In that moment, a bucket of ice water was poured over my head. It wasn't just once or twice, it was a constant thing. No matter what I achieved, in their eyes, it was never as important as Emily organizing a successful party or putting together a cute outfit. My value seemed to exist only on my report cards and certificates, not in me as a person. I slowly learned not to expect their praise, not to hope for their attention. It's not that I wasn't jealous, but I knew very clearly that Emily and I were on completely different paths. She relied on her external charm and social skills, while I had only my brain and my hard work. I silently poured all my energy into my studies, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. I knew that just studying wouldn't be enough to earn a shred of respect in this family, but it was the only leverage I had, the only weapon I could hold. I got into law school, which was no joke. The tuition was expensive, the competition was fierce, and I was in the library every day, studying harder than I ever did in high school. After graduation, I didn't rush to a big company or law firm to make quick money like my classmates. I chose to apply for a position within the federal court system. That place, as you know, has an incredibly high barrier to entry, and many positions have strict confidentiality rules. After multiple rounds of screening, written exams, interviews, and background checks, I finally landed a job at the federal court. It was a position that would make anyone sit up and take notice, but I didn't tell my family my specific role. I just said, with a shrug, "Oh, I'm just doing some clerical work in the court system, you know, processing files and stuff." Why did I do that? The reasons are complicated. For one, being a federal judge, especially when dealing with sensitive cases, does have strict confidentiality requirements, so it's not convenient to reveal too much. On the other hand, I had probably just gotten used to being overlooked and was even starting to enjoy this hidden status. I didn't want them to suddenly look at me differently, with that surprised, almost condescending look. I wanted them to see my worth someday for my actual abilities, not because I suddenly had some halo. They never pressed me for details anyway. As long as I wasn't causing them trouble or asking for money, they were happy to leave me alone. All their attention was focused on Emily and her fiancé, James, who worked on Wall Street. James, the name just smelled of money. At every family gathering, my parents would tirelessly show him off. Emily, too, always revolved around James. Her life seemed to have entered a luxury brand mode since she met him. It was always about designer bags, lavish trips, and the jewelry James bought for her. I'd listen to them talk about how James was a big deal on Wall Street, how he'd make a fortune with a flick of his finger, while I just sat there like an outsider, quietly sipping my tea. They even discussed in front of me how a bookworm sister like me would probably never meet a man on James's level. I'd listen, calm on the surface, but a fire was burning inside me, a fire I kept locked deep within. A few months later, Emily's grand engagement party finally arrived. It was more extravagant than a movie scene. The venue was the city's most exclusive hotel ballroom, gleaming with golden light, the crystal chandeliers so bright they made my eyes hurt. The champagne tower was stacked high, expensive flowers decorated every corner, and the air was filled with the scent of French perfume. The guests were all in custom-made suits and dresses, their every move oozing with upper-class arrogance. And me? I wore a sharp, well-tailored dark blue business suit, the same one I'd bought specifically for my federal court interview. It made me feel professional and competent. But here, in this setting, it looked so ordinary, so out of place. I hadn't even bothered to get my hair done, just tied it in a simple ponytail, and I wore my usual, unchanging glasses. When I signed in, the staff member glanced at my outfit with a hint of subtle disdain and pointed to an inconspicuous corner. "Miss Lilith, your seat is over there." I followed his finger. Sure enough, I was placed far from the main table, near a corner, right next to a few kids' tables with children's cutlery. I felt a bit awkward and even humiliated, but I was used to it. I wasn't the little girl who would cry about this anymore. I walked to my seat, sat down quietly, and watched the crowd as if I were watching a play. Emily, on the other hand, was the queen of the night. She wore a custom-made champagne-colored gown, adorned with tiny sequins that sparkled with every turn, as if she had absorbed all the light in the ballroom. A happy smile was plastered on her face, and James stood beside her, tall and handsome in a tuxedo, his eyes full of adoration. They moved through the crowd hand in hand, accepting everyone's blessings and compliments. I watched them, feeling like I was watching celebrities on TV, distant and unreal. The toasting began. Emily and James gracefully made their way through the guests, clinking glasses with every important person, exchanging polite but meaningful words. I assumed they wouldn't notice me. After all, I was seated in such a remote, unremarkable spot. I even secretly prayed they wouldn't come over, just let me finish my meal in peace and leave with some dignity. But fate, it seems, has a twisted sense of humor. As they approached my little table, Emily actually stopped. She looked at me with that familiar, high-and-mighty pity, or maybe it was the satisfaction of showing off. A perfect smile was on her face, her voice not too loud, but loud enough for the tables around us to hear, and even for some passing guests to stop and look at us with curiosity. "Oh, Lilith," she said, drawing out my name with a feigned surprise, "are you still wearing that old-fashioned suit? I think you wore that to my birthday party last time, didn't you? My gosh, that was ages ago." She turned her head slightly and smiled at James as if she were telling a funny joke. Then she turned back to me, her tone dripping with fake concern, but every word was a knife. "Oh, James says that a boring lawyer like you will probably never get married." "Look," she said, deliberately extending her left hand in front of my face. The huge diamond on her ring flashed blindingly under the lights. "James bought this for me. He put a lot of thought into it, you know? This one ring is probably worth more than your annual salary, right? James is so generous." I stared at the glittering diamond. It was like a sharp blade, piercing my eyes and my heart. A boring lawyer? Won't get married? Can't afford her ring with a year's salary? Each word was a nail, hammered into my heart. My mind went blank. All the other sounds faded away, leaving only her mocking words echoing in my ears. I could feel my cheeks burning, my heart pounding in my chest as if it wanted to break free. James stood beside Emily and just gave me a quick, dismissive glance. His eyes held a look of utter contempt, and he made no effort to deny anything Emily said. He didn't even offer a polite smile, as if I wasn't worth the effort and was nothing more than a prop for Emily's boasting. He even tilted his chin slightly, a posture that seemed to say, "Yes, what she's saying is the truth. You're just a boring loser." In that moment, I wanted to smash my champagne glass on the floor or throw the wine in Emily's smug face. My fingers squeezed the stem of the glass so hard my knuckles turned white. The champagne inside trembled with my shaking hand, threatening to spill. I could feel my body trembling. It wasn't fear, it was rage, a cold and resolute determination born from extreme humiliation. But I didn't. I just took a deep breath, forcing down the fury that was about to erupt. I looked up and gave Emily a polite, if slightly forced, smile. I didn't say a word, because I knew any rebuttal would have sounded weak. My silence, to her, might have seemed like an admission of defeat, but in my heart, it was a silent vow, a goal I set for myself. I told myself, "Lilith, one day, I will show them just how much a boring lawyer can accomplish. One day, I will make them pay dearly for everything they said today." I didn't stay long that night, making an excuse to leave the engagement party. The night breeze did nothing to cool the fire burning inside me. Only that cold determination took root deep in my bones. I didn't stay long at the engagement party that night. The condescending mockery from Emily and James was like a dull knife, scraping at my heart over and over again. I held it in, maintaining my composure in front of everyone, but my palms were sweaty, and my nails were almost digging into my skin. As I left the hotel, the cool night breeze hit my face, but it couldn't extinguish the fire inside me. It wasn't the heat of impulsive anger, but the cold, firm resolve born from the deepest humiliation. Never in my life, Lilith, had I been so insulted. And to be stomped on by my own sister and her fiancé in front of so many people, I told myself that day, Lilith, you will make them pay for this, double. Not with some underhanded tricks, but with my own abilities. I would publicly rip off their masks of hypocrisy. When I got home, I couldn't even be bothered to shower. I just collapsed on the bed. My mind was filled with Emily's triumphant face and James's contemptuous gaze. I closed my eyes, trying to clear those images, and started to think. For years, I had buried my head in books, graduated from law school, and successfully entered the federal court system. I had worked my way up from the bottom as a law clerk, and only I knew how hard it was. I hadn't told my family my specific role, partly because being a federal judge comes with strict confidentiality rules, especially when handling major cases, and it's not appropriate to reveal too many details. But a deeper reason was probably my own stubborn pride. I didn't want them to think my success was based on luck or favors. I wanted them to see my achievements and truly realize how shallow their previous judgment of me had been. The next morning, I got ready, putting on my usual business suit, pulling my hair back into a neat ponytail, and arrived at the courthouse on time. Life had to go on, and work had to be done. My duties wouldn't change because of what I went through last night. My days were packed, processing mountains of files, researching complex cases, and writing detailed legal opinions. Although I always told people I was doing clerical work, this clerical job was far from simple typing or fetching coffee. It required rigorous logical thinking, a precise grasp of legal statutes, and the ability to quickly analyze and filter massive amounts of information. My world was filled with case files, laws, and precedents, a world that was dry, but incredibly meticulous. Just a few days after the engagement party, an unusual tension started to build in our court. The air was thick with a sense of gravity, everyone was whispering but no one dared to speak loudly. I heard that a huge, high-profile case was coming in, involving the financial sector. It was a case with a massive amount of money at stake and a wide-reaching impact. Such major cases always caused a stir in the legal community, as they often involved tangled interests and could implicate people in high places. My colleagues and I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. After all, getting involved in a case of this magnitude was a rare opportunity for any legal professional. Soon, the details came through. As expected, it was a major financial fraud case, a joint investigation by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and the Department of Justice. The scale of the case was beyond anyone's imagination. It was said to involve billions of dollars and multiple well-known investment banks, affecting tens of thousands of ordinary investors. The media was already buzzing, with news outlets gearing up for continuous coverage. A trial like this would surely become a national focal point. In the following days, everyone in my department worked feverishly, putting in extra hours to prepare. Files piled up on my desk like small mountains. I buried myself in these documents, sleeping only 4 or 5 hours a night, and even eating while reviewing materials. I pored over preliminary investigation reports, financial statements, transaction records, and a huge volume of correspondence. To me, these dense texts and numbers were like pieces of a giant puzzle. Just as I was about to be drowned in the sea of numbers and jargon, a familiar name suddenly caught my eye, and not a person's name, but an investment bank's. I paused, rubbed my eyes, thinking I was mistaken. Wasn't that the bank where James worked? My heart skipped a beat, and an indescribable feeling surged within me. What a small world. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down, and continued to read. As I delved deeper into the documents, James's name, though not a defendant, was mentioned repeatedly as a key witness or a potential person of interest. His department and the projects he managed were intricately linked to the fraud case. A few paragraphs even explicitly mentioned that he, as a project manager, had signed several critical documents. My fingers brushed over his printed name on the report, and the sense of shock and irony grew stronger. So, the wealth he'd been shaking up Wall Street with was likely built on a huge scandal. I realized then that this case was no longer just an ordinary legal matter for me. It suddenly took on an unprecedented personal dimension. But this didn't distract me, it made me even more focused and clear-headed. I told myself that no matter who was involved, I had to maintain absolute professionalism and impartiality. This was my professional duty and the foundation of my career. To my greater surprise, just as I was swamped with work, I received word from my superiors. I had been appointed as one of the presiding judges for this case of the century. I was truly stunned. Although I had worked hard and achieved some success over the years, being entrusted with such a heavy responsibility so quickly caught me off guard. The process for appointing federal judges is extremely rigorous, and once appointed, it comes with immense responsibility and pressure. This case not only involved a massive amount of money but also sensitive political and economic powers, and the level of public scrutiny was unprecedented. The reason I hadn't told my family about my specific role was not only because of the confidentiality rules, but also because I had just been appointed as a presiding judge on this high-risk, high-profile case. Not even my family knew. My appointment was finalized shortly after the engagement party, and the process was swift and confidential. I didn't have the time or the opportunity to tell them. And frankly, even if I had, they probably wouldn't have understood the weight of it. In their eyes, I was still just that boring lawyer, wasn't I? After my appointment, my workload doubled. I poured myself into preparing for the trial. Every morning, I would wake up before dawn, my mind already organizing the case's timeline on my way to the courthouse. During the day, I was in my office, surrounded by countless legal documents, evidence, investigation reports, and expert opinions. I had to read them, analyze them, and find the loopholes and key points. Sometimes, to confirm one detail, I would cross-reference dozens of documents, comparing different data. My colleagues said I was like a tireless machine, but I knew this case held a special meaning for me. I was not just a judge, but a person who had been looked down upon, and now I had the chance to prove my worth with my own abilities. At night, I would drag my tired body home, but my mind was still racing. I would pace around my apartment, thinking about potential issues that might arise during the trial and rehearsing different arguments. To ensure every detail was perfect, I would even simulate courtroom debates in my head, running through questions and answers again and again. The complexity and scope of the case kept me incredibly busy. I had no personal time and had to cancel all my social plans. My life was now just work and the pursuit of justice. In those mountains of files, several senior executives from James's bank were listed as the main defendants. James himself, while not a direct defendant, appeared repeatedly in various chains of evidence as a key witness or potential person of interest. His role at the bank and the projects he'd managed were central to the investigation. I read many descriptions of him that were completely different from the glossy image Emily always portrayed. The report painted him as a Wall Street elite who walked a fine line, an expert at manipulating the rules. I knew in my heart that this time, he had gotten into serious trouble, the kind of trouble that even a Wall Street elite like him couldn't easily escape. And that trouble was about to be presided over by me, Lilith, the boring lawyer he had mocked. The gears of fate, turning silently, were pushing us toward the same courtroom. I didn't tell anyone about my relationship with James and Emily. I just waited quietly for the day of the trial. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace, the calm before the storm. I knew the real showdown was just beginning. The day of the trial, the sky was a dreary gray, as if it were about to rain. But the weather didn't dampen the enthusiasm of the media and the public. Outside the courthouse, a triple-layered crowd of reporters and photographers with their cameras were already gathered, flashbulbs popping like a movie premiere. This was a massive financial case, with huge sums of money at stake and several Wall Street titans involved. It was a national sensation. I came out of the underground parking garage, avoiding the swarm of reporters, and entered the courthouse through the staff entrance. All along the way, I could feel the tension and excitement in the air. Every staff member moved with a purpose, a hint of gravity in their eyes. I walked into my office and changed into my familiar black judicial robe. The robe was heavy, and as I put it on, I felt the weight of my responsibility settle on my shoulders. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. The black robe, the neat collar, my hair pulled back perfectly, and my usual glasses. The person in the mirror looked calm, serious, and possessed an aura of authority. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Yes, I was once mocked as a boring lawyer, but today, as a presiding judge, I would be sitting on the bench, guiding a major case, and even deciding the fate of some people. A few minutes before the trial began, I sat in the judge's chambers, reviewing the key points and procedures of the case one last time. I knew today would be a long and challenging day. The case had far-reaching implications, and the defense had hired the top legal team in the country. They would use every trick in the book to try to get their clients acquitted. But I, Lilith, was fully prepared. When I entered the courtroom, it was already packed. Besides the media, there were many socialites and figures from the financial world in the audience, all eager to witness this trial of the century. In the defendant's box sat several senior executives from James's bank. Their faces were grim, their eyes uneasy. And beside them, I was startled to see James. He was wearing a finely tailored dark suit, his hair neatly combed, but his usual confident, arrogant demeanor was gone. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes darted around. He clearly hadn't expected this case to go to trial so quickly or on such a grand scale. As a bank representative and key witness, he sat next to the legal team, seemingly whispering something to the lawyers, but his body language showed he was anything but at ease. I could almost feel the tension radiating from him, the stress of facing the unknown and immense pressure. From time to time, he would glance towards the courtroom entrance, as if waiting or hoping for something. Time ticked by, and the clamor in the courtroom gradually died down. All eyes were fixed on the entrance. The air seemed to freeze, filled with a tense anticipation. Finally, the court clerk's solemn and booming voice echoed through the courtroom, "All rise. The presiding judge is entering." Everyone stood up. My heart skipped a beat, and then I walked out from the judge's chambers with solemn dignity. I wore the black robe, each step carrying the weight and authority of the court. The hem of my robe swayed slightly, a dark wave that captured everyone's attention. My face was expressionless, my eyes calm and profound, conveying an unquestionable authority. I walked slowly but surely towards the bench, each step feeling like I was walking on all the contempt they had once shown me. I stopped at the center of the bench. My gaze swept across the courtroom, from the press area to the audience, and finally to the defendant's box. My eyes didn't linger, they were just calm and professional. Eventually, my gaze landed on James's face. When he heard the clerk announce the judge's entry, James had instinctively stood up. He had been whispering to a lawyer beside him, but when he heard the announcement and looked up with everyone else as I appeared, the moment he saw me, all the color drained from his face, as if he had been completely emptied. His already tense body froze completely, as if he'd been put under a spell. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly agape, trying to say something but no sound came out. His lips were just trembling. His face was a picture of shock, disbelief, and a deep-seated fear. It was the look of a man who had just seen someone who couldn't possibly be there. The lawyer next to him noticed his odd behavior, looked at him with confusion, and whispered, "Mr. James? Are you all right?" James didn't seem to hear him. He just stared at me, his eyes unblinking, as if trying to burn a hole through me. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down a few times. Finally, he stuttered, his voice so faint only those close to him could hear, You're the presiding judge?" The voice was light and weak, but to me, it sounded like a thunderclap. The terror on his face was so real, so intense, it was almost tangible. He looked like his world was crumbling around him. I didn't respond. I simply sat down in the center of the bench, picked up my gavel, and tapped it lightly. "The court is now in session," my voice rang out, clear and powerful, with an unquestionable authority. I gave a quick glance to a still-dazed James, then turned to the chief prosecutor on my left and said, "Prosecutor, you may begin your opening statement." The trial officially began. But James had clearly not recovered from his shock. He seemed distracted in the defendant's box, his eyes occasionally darting to me with a complex, terrified expression. The arrogant mockery he once held was now a storm raging inside him. And I, Lilith, the one he had sneered at as a boring lawyer, was now sitting on the bench, holding his fate and the future of his bank in my hands. This stark contrast was a silent, powerful form of retaliation. I knew that my presence alone was the best counterattack. I no longer needed to say a thing. Every glance, every command from the bench, was silently stating that the contempt they once had for me would now become the very power that made them tremble. My appearance was like a massive stone thrown into a calm lake, creating a huge ripple in James's mind. He became visibly rattled, and when he was called to testify as a witness, he made several major mistakes while answering questions. His usual confident Wall Street charm, that effortless composure, was completely gone. He stammered, he was incoherent, and during cross-examination, the prosecutor found several key inconsistencies. He tried to cover up, to argue, but his eyes kept avoiding mine. The guilt and fear were almost palpable. And Emily? She was in the audience, still with her head held high at first. I had noticed her. She wore a fancy dress and a look of pride on her face, as if she were showing off her fiancé's importance by getting to attend such a big trial. At first, she even gave James a little smile, trying to encourage him. But when the court clerk announced the judge's entrance, when she saw me in my black robe, walking toward the bench, her smile froze. Her eyes went wide, her mouth slightly open, a look of bewilderment and disbelief on her face. She couldn't comprehend what was happening, it was completely beyond her reality. The relatives sitting near her reacted similarly, from shock to whispering. I heard muffled voices, people muttering, "My God, that's Federal Judge Lilith Jones. Didn't she say she had a clerical job at the court? Lilith? I thought she was just an assistant. Oh my God, that bookworm Lilith is the presiding judge?" These whispers spread through the audience like an electric current. Emily's face grew paler, her smile completely gone. She finally realized that the boring lawyer she had mocked, the sister she had relegated to the kids' table, was now the judge presiding over her fiancé's fate. Her body trembled slightly, her gaze shifting from me to James and back again. The shock and fear had completely consumed her. Her pride, her confidence, all of it was crushed by my silent presence. Everything she had been so proud of had turned into a massive irony. I simply sat there, maintaining my absolute professionalism and impartiality as a judge, without revealing our connection. But I knew this silent trial was more than enough to make them tremble and to cost them their dignity. On the first day of the trial, James was completely thrown. He obviously hadn't expected me, the boring lawyer, to appear as the presiding judge, nor had he anticipated the case moving forward so quickly. His eyes kept darting to me, filled with terror, confusion, and disbelief. It was the look of a mouse being watched by a cat, utterly rattled. His legal team, no matter how good, couldn't make up for his psychological collapse. During his testimony as a key witness, he was fidgety and made several major mistakes in his answers to the prosecutor's questions. He mumbled, his logic was all over the place, and he even tried to shift blame a few times, only to dig himself into a deeper hole. I watched him, completely unfazed, observing him with the same calm professionalism I would any other witness. My duty was to ensure a fair trial, not to settle personal scores. Emily, sitting in the audience, went from deathly pale to a deep flush. The whispers of her relatives and the scrutinizing, excited glances of the media were like daggers to her heart. She could no longer maintain her proud demeanor, deflating like a popped balloon. I could feel her occasional glares at me, filled with anger and resentment, but mostly a helpless fear. Everything she had been so proud of had turned into a massive joke. Her proud fiancé was now being judged by the sister she had once mocked. It must have been a bitter pill to swallow. I paid her no mind, my full attention focused on the trial. The entire trial was long and complex, lasting for several weeks. Every day, I sat on the bench, robed in black, solemn and fair. I presided over the fierce clashes between the prosecution and defense, guided the presentation of evidence, and reviewed witness testimonies. I knew this case was about more than just money, it was about the hard-earned savings of countless investors and the reputation of Wall Street. I had to ensure every procedure was lawful and every ruling was based on facts and law. During the trial, James's bank hired the nation's top legal team, who tried to confuse the issues and create doubt with intricate legal jargon and financial terms. They submitted a large volume of evidence to try to prove the bank and its executives were innocent or had been misled. But the prosecution team was just as strong. They were well prepared and systematically exposed the inner workings of the fraudulent scheme. James's performance as a key witness was a disaster. He tried to defend the bank and clear his own name, but he was too nervous, or rather, too guilty. His lies were one by one exposed by the prosecutor's solid evidence. I watched him, the man who had been so arrogant and cocky at the engagement party, now looking like a guilty child, his eyes shifting, his words garbled. During cross-examination, he made several obvious memory errors, which the prosecutor was quick to catch and record. He tried to argue, but his voice trembled, and a fine layer of sweat glistened on his forehead. At one point, he misstated a date on a crucial document, a document with his own signature on it. The prosecutor seized on this loophole and immediately pointed out that he was potentially committing perjury. I noticed James's legal team growing more and more anxious. They tried to interrupt the prosecutor's questions and cover for James's lies, but I overruled them every time. I strictly followed legal procedure, ensuring the trial was fair and efficient. My presence alone was a silent pressure that prevented James from playing his usual games of power. His clever little tricks, under the spotlight of the courtroom, were utterly pathetic. During the recesses, I didn't relax. I had to review all the evidence again and again, making sure I knew every detail of the case. I consulted numerous precedents to ensure my rulings were fully backed by the law. My brain was working non-stop. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. The courtroom was packed, even the aisles were full. All the media cameras were aimed at the bench. My heart was calm, without a single extra beat. I sat on the bench and read the verdict. Every word, every legal statute, was carefully considered. The final verdict was announced. James's investment bank was found guilty. It was ordered to pay a huge fine, an amount so large that it could cripple the once powerful Wall Street giant and even lead to bankruptcy. The bank's reputation was in tatters, its stock plummeted, and a flood of clients began withdrawing their funds. But that wasn't all. At the end of the verdict, I specifically mentioned James himself. Because of his repeated attempts to cover up and commit perjury during the trial, I recommended that the Department of Justice and the prosecution team file a separate criminal suit against him. My reasons were clear and well supported, based on his performance on the stand and the many inconsistencies found during cross-examination. I announced that James would face a deeper investigation for suspected perjury and his potential involvement in the financial fraud cover-up. When I announced the verdict, the courtroom erupted in a buzz. The sound of camera shutters was a steady barrage, and the audience began to murmur. James looked like he had been drained of his soul. He slumped in the defendant's box, his eyes vacant. His once brilliant image had vanished overnight. His career was over. He now faced not only the possibility of a prison sentence but also a complete loss of his reputation and social standing. Everything he had been proud of was gone. And Emily? She was in the audience. When she heard the verdict, her body trembled, and she quickly covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sympathy, they were tears of despair and collapse. She had wanted to marry into wealth and live a life of luxury, and now, her fiancé, her catch of a lifetime, was a potential inmate, and he was being sent there by the very sister she had mocked. Her face was ashen, her body swaying. The relatives next to her had to hold her up. All her former pride and mockery had become a sharp boomerang, hitting her hard. She was completely humiliated. I put down my gavel and announced the court was adjourned. Throughout the entire process, I hadn't revealed my personal relationship with James and Emily. I was simply Lilith Jones, a federal judge, fulfilling my duty. But my presence itself was the best revenge. That silent trial was more powerful than any words. It not only exposed the truth of the financial fraud but also tore off the masks of hypocrisy. With my professionalism and fairness, I made those who had once looked down on me pay a huge price. That price was more than just money and freedom, it was everything they had been proud of and the public shame they could never repair. As I watched James being led away by bailiffs and Emily sobbing in the audience, my heart was at peace. I had done it. I had given them the most devastating blow in my own way. This was just the beginning of my long career, but for me, it was a profound milestone. The moment the verdict was announced, it was like a huge earthquake that shook our entire family. Before, my parents and relatives were steeped in the false glory of Emily and James, completely dismissing my clerical job at the federal court. They never imagined that the quiet, unassuming bookworm Lilith, hiding in the corner, would be the presiding judge holding the fate of their future son-in-law in her hands. When the news of the financial fraud case and the verdict broke, and my name, Presiding Judge Lilith Jones, was splashed across headlines, they finally woke up, realizing just how shallow and materialistic they had been. In the days after the verdict, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was mostly my parents, their voices filled with a newfound respect and a hint of cautious guilt. My mom, who used to sigh about me never getting married, now said in a fawning tone, "Lilith, my darling daughter, you are so amazing. I was so wrong about you. You've been so outstanding since you were a child. I'm so proud of you." My dad chimed in, his voice slightly trembling, "Lilith, your father is so proud of you. What you did for justice is truly great. When are you free? We should have dinner." I knew these words came too late and were full of hypocrisy. But I didn't call them out or get sarcastic. I just calmly told them, I just did what I was supposed to do. It's my job. My tone was flat, with no hint of seeking praise or showing off. I knew that true respect wasn't based on my position or achievements, but on understanding and accepting me as a person. They had once ignored me, and now they were suddenly acting close because of my status and power. I saw right through their shift. I didn't reject their dinner invitations, but I didn't show any excessive enthusiasm either. My world no longer revolved around their expectations. As for Emily, her world had completely collapsed. With James's bank found guilty and facing a huge fine, and James himself facing a separate lawsuit for perjury and a potential prison sentence, his career was over. His engagement to Emily was, of course, off. The catch of a lifetime she was so proud of had now become a financial criminal everyone in her social circle avoided. Emily was utterly humiliated. She had once been so dazzling in her social circle, a socialite everyone fawned over. Now, she was the laughingstock. I even heard that her friends were whispering about her, mocking her broken rich man dream and how she got nothing. She used to brag about the luxury items and lavish trips James bought for her, and now they were her biggest burdens. Without James's financial support, her luxurious lifestyle was unsustainable. She was forced to sell some of her designer bags and jewelry to try to keep up appearances, but it didn't work. Her former pride and extravagance had become a heavy weight on her shoulders. I'd occasionally see some negative news about her on social media. Her former friends now kept their distance. Her fans had become her mockers. She tried to re-enter the public eye, but every appearance was met with negative comments about James and the financial case. At one point, Emily even tried to contact me. She sent me long messages, her tone shifting from self-pity to begging. She didn't directly admit her past mistakes, but she hinted at us being sisters and hoped I could help James, saying things like, "After all, we're family," or he was just misguided. She even suggested that if I could help James get a lighter sentence, she and James could start over, and she would show her gratitude. I read those messages and just felt a bitter irony. She only remembered I was her sister now? She only remembered family now? Did she think about that when she publicly humiliated me? I didn't reply and blocked her number. I felt no anger towards her, only a clear-headed awareness. My duty was to uphold the dignity of the law, not to serve anyone's personal interests, especially not those who had hurt me, and certainly not to compromise the justice I was meant to defend. I continued to thrive in my position. The successful handling of the case earned me immense respect and recognition in the legal community. My name, Lilith Jones, was no longer just an ordinary federal judge but a symbol of professionalism, fairness, and courage. I began to receive more complex and high-profile cases, and my professional competence and meticulous attitude were praised by my superiors and peers. I was no longer the overlooked Lilith, but the respected Judge Lilith. My life became full and meaningful. I dedicated more time to my work and even started exploring new hobbies. I was no longer just the bookworm who only knew how to study. My life had become more diverse and exciting. I used my abilities and integrity to prove my true worth, making those who had once looked down on me pay a huge price. They lost their money, status, and reputation, and possibly their freedom. I, on the other hand, had found my true self in the ruins and was shining brighter than ever. I never went out of my way to show off or seek revenge. But when I achieved success at work and received accolades, when my name appeared in legal news reports, I knew that the people who had once scoffed at me were watching in silence. Their past arrogance and ignorance had become my stepping stones. My comeback was silent, but deafening. It proved that a person's worth is never defined by their looks, money, or social labels, but by their inner strength, intelligence, and resilience. I had finally become the person I wanted to be, and that, more than any revenge, was what truly felt powerful and satisfying. End.